What's up, guys, and welcome to Mild vs. the Movies, week number 3. This is my movie a day challenge for 2019. I'm doing my little review blog thing at the end of every week. As you should hopefully have noticed by now, there's been 3 of them. Well, this is the third one. Little bit of housekeeping before we jump into the first review. I appreciate all the comments I got in the last video. Some more suggestions. Anders somehow managed to suggest a movie that I watched this week before I read his comment, and that's done that twice now. So I'm not saying he's psychic and can read my mind, but maybe he can. So there we go. There's an interesting little fact for you. Lots of just people seem to be enjoying it. I'm glad you are. I hope you enjoy this. I'm enjoying making it, so that's the main thing, I suppose. And yeah, so we're just gonna jump into our first review, which is Split, which I watched on Netflix, directed by M. Night Shyamalan himself, from 2016. So for our plot summary, 3 girls are kidnapped by Kevin, played by James McAvoy, a man with 23 personalities. They try to escape before number 24, the Beast, arrives. For the pros of this movie, for my first pro, I've got James McAvoy's performance. Felt he was quite good in it. He was very good at distinguishing between the different personalities. He made each one felt like an individual rather than just being the same person with a different character. So for my next pro, I thought some of the story ideas were kind of interesting. Like, we have these 3 girls that are being held hostage by this guy with multiple personalities. And I thought we were going to kind of go into a bit of them having to try and convince one of the personalities to let them out, but not let the other ones know, kind of working like that. I thought that would be quite a fun and interesting story, but that's not quite what it turns into. We'll get into that. Now for my cons of this movie, I'll bring this up because I have this problem with quite a few of M. Night Shyamalan's movies. Not so much The Sixth Sense, but some of the later ones you kind of see it more. It's his dialogue. I don't think he's good at writing dialogue. Specifically, he can't write normal dialogue. And that's really apparent in the opening scene before the plot basically starts, where these 3 girls at a birthday party in a restaurant. And the way they talk, it's wrong. I can't quite describe what's wrong with it. It's just unnatural. It comes across as someone who's read about a teenager in a book and gone, now I know how they think. I can put them in the thing. I just wasn't impressed with the dialogue. I think M. Night Shyamalan, I've kind of written this down. I've thought this in the past. I think he would be better as a story by M. Night Shyamalan, script by someone else. I think that, because he does have interesting ideas for stories, and even his bad movies, you look at them and you go, that's kind of an interesting idea. Well, some more than others. The Happening, that was never going to be good. But maybe actually if someone, I could never like that movie. But his other stuff, like The Village, that's a kind of interesting idea. I mean, not the Avatar movie. Well, we won't pretend. People will just pretend that one doesn't exist anyway. But you look at stuff I'm trying to remember his other ones, The Visit. That kind of has an interesting story, even though it's quite predictable, I think. He has nice ideas, but it doesn't, the implication doesn't back it up, For my second con, there wasn't enough James McAvoy in this for me. I know that sounds weird, he's kind of the main character, he's the focus of the story, but we don't really get to see enough of those personalities for my liking. We see about 6 in total, maybe a couple more, in really short bursts. I was kind of hoping to see more than that. James McAvoy is a very good actor, and he's very talented. I wanted to see those other personalities show up more, so he can do more stuff. Because outside of one personality that's a woman, and one personality that's a child, there's very little variation in them. They're all men, like him. So it doesn't feel, they'll be oh, I like this thing, I don't like this thing. But that really doesn't make it feel that different, I would have liked more James McAvoy. I could write that review about any movie, to be honest. thirdly is my next con. This is going to sound a bit strange, but there's a subplot in this movie that I feel is really unnecessary and kind of gross. I don't really like it being in like a blockbuster movie because it's like, I'll just say what it is. It's about child abuse, and it doesn't really factor into the story well, and it's, you know, I wouldn't get M. Night Shyamalan to write a movie about something with that. It doesn't sit right with me in the movie. And it doesn't feel right, and it doesn't feel... it does serve a plot purpose in the story, but I think it could have been handled a lot better. But I don't want to talk too much because it will spoil the movie. But I didn't like it. And there's other ways you could have dealt with it that would have been a lot more appropriate. For my fourth and final con for this movie, this is a matter of personal taste. But I kind of hate movies that have baloney science in them. So, like, I mentioned this with Annihilation, and Split is arguably worse, but I gave it a bit of a pass because it's not trying to be some, you know, highbrow intelligent movie. It's just a dumb blockbuster. But part of the logic of this movie is people with multiple personality disorder can alter their body chemistry. So, like, some people, some of their personalities might be diabetic and some of them won't. And you're like, okay, maybe I can go with that. And then it's, oh, but if they believe themselves to be superhuman, then they will be superhuman. And you're like, what? Because, like, so it only applies to people with multiple... Like, you see, it's one of those things where it's like, the more you pick at the logic, it starts to, like, fall apart a bit. Because it's... At what point does the belief kick in to the point it becomes true? If I don't have multiple personalities, if I believed in myself hard enough, I was like, Mild, you can fly. Would I be able to fly? I mean, flight's probably not the right answer to go for. Well, it is kinda, because like some of the stuff he believes that he can then do, and is true about him, you go, that doesn't quite scan with me. It's a shame, because I'm like, if this movie was just this, like, guy with split personality disorder kidnaps these 3 girls, has these delusions that he's, like, gonna become some sort of superhero because he's crazy, and was trying to, like, those girls were trying to, like, outsmart him and escape, that would be an exciting thriller, I think. I bet it would be quite a good movie. You could do that quite well. It'd be quite interesting. All the, like, supernatural stuff doesn't kind of fit. It's in there for a purpose. And I think the thing is as well, it's M. Night Shyamalan always has his twists. This one as well, if you watch it now, you know what the twist is. But the fact that glass exists, you know what the twist is in this movie. Which is kind of lame, I think. But yeah, I thought this movie was alright. I gave it a 5 out of 10. I didn't enjoy it as much as I was hoping I would. If it was more the movie I thought it was going to be, I would have liked it more. Turning into like a weird supervillain origin story, I wasn't keen on that. So yeah, a 5 out of 10 for me. Do I think you should watch it? Maybe? Maybe if you liked Unbreakable and you're gonna go and see Glass, maybe watch it. I mean, that's the sole reason I watched this movie, to be honest, is I thought I could cover Glass for the channel. That'll be a fun, like, you know, current movie I could go and see in the cinema. That's the only reason I watched this, was so I would know what was going on with James McAvoy's character in that movie. If you're not going to see Glass, I wouldn't go out your way to see it. It's not his worst movie, but it's not his best either. It's very middle of the road. So for my second movie this week, that I watched on Monday the 14th, I watched From Dusk Till Dawn on Netflix, directed by Robert Rodriguez from the year 1996. So for a summary, 2 bank robber brothers, played by George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino, desperately attempt to reach Mexico. En route, they kidnap a family where their father is a former minister. I think he is. Is he a minister or is he a deacon? I think he's a minister. Played by Harvey Keitel. we're going to go into our pros for the movie. One of them for me is the dialogue at times. Quentin Tarantino wrote this script, and you can tell he did. It's a very Quentin Tarantino script, the way the characters talk, the way they interact. I'll get into... I'm not entirely keen on all of the script, but the dialogue is quite good at times. It's quite funny. It's quite... If you've seen a Tarantino movie, like if you've seen something like Pulp Fiction, you kind of get what I mean about the characters. Like, they're not like talking about movies and stuff, but you know, it's that kind of snappy, witty dialogue. For my next pro, I think the opening scene is really fun. It's quite funny as well. So like, there's a sheriff comes in to buy... What's he buying? He's buying like... I think he's buying like snacks or something. And then he goes to the bathroom, well, like the clerk's, you know, talking to him. And the minute he goes to the bathroom, you find out, oh crap, it's actually a hold-up, and George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino are holding the guy hostage, and if he doesn't comply with what they want, and then like the whole thing, then the whole dynamic changes when he comes back out. You're viewing the scene completely differently. It's very clever, actually. I actually really like the opening. The opening's one of the strongest parts of the movie. I really like it. Lots of the effects in the movie are pretty good. There's a lot of special effects in this. Probably more than you'd think if you're just going into this blind. There are a lot more special effects than you think, and I quite like them. They're not amazing. They've kind of aged a bit, but they've kind of got that kind of old effect, practical effect charm, you know, rather than CGI looking a bit bland and boring. They've got that kind of little charm about them that practical effects have. I quite like them, practical effects. They're always a bit charming. For my fourth pro, this is like a little minor one, but I loved having Danny Trejo in a movie. I always get like a pop whenever he shows up. I'm like, yay, Danny Trejo. Obviously, it's a Robert Rodriguez movie. Robert Rodriguez cast Danny Trejo and everything, usually playing Machete. He's not Machete this time around. He's a completely different character called Knives. I just realised that he's called Knives rather than Machete. It's like, oh, it must have taken him hours to come up with that character. But you know, Danny Trejo is normally in his movies, and I really like Danny Trejo. So, that was good for me. Okay, so for my first con, I feel like some of the dialogue is a bit too crass. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but I mean it's offensive, but it feels like it's being offensive not to make a point, just for shock value. So, I don't know how much of a deal this word is over in the US. I'm not going to say it because it's... Let's put it, you wouldn't call someone this in the UK, but they use a word for people with disabilities in the opening scene, and that kind of soured me on the movie a bit, even though I said I liked the opening scene. Like, I liked the idea of it, and I liked the setting of it, and I liked all that. That line really took me out. I was like, oh, I don't like that. So it's a word for disabilities that starts with M. You can work out what that is yourself, but I didn't like it. It really kind of put me off the movie a bit. Made it almost feel like a bit dirty. I was like, ugh. For my second con, I kind of lost interest after... This movie is quite famous for having a big tonal shift in it. I'm not going to spoil what it is, even though everything about this movie spoils what it is. Like, the poster does. The IMDb description spoils what it is. And it's not until an hour into the movie. I'm like, don't spoil what happens an hour into the hour and 40-minute movie. Is it an hour and 40? Oh, it's an hour and 48. Hold on. But I just, after it happened, I was kind of like, oh, so we're in a different movie now. It almost feels like you go from being in something like Reservoir Dogs. That's what it most feels close to. So you're in Reservoir Dogs, okay? And then suddenly, you're in Army of Darkness. The Evil Dead 3. Or you're in, maybe not Brain Dead, but like one of those early Peter Jackson movies, or something like that. You suddenly, or it almost feels a bit like you're in a Quentin Tarantino movie, and then you're in a Robert Rodriguez movie. Kind of. I like Robert Rodriguez. I think it's just, it's a bit too much of a tonal shift for me. It feels like there's a tonal shift, but also a lot of the characters kind of shift in a way where I'm like, that character wasn't like that 15 minutes ago. What's going on? So from a third point, I feel like the nudity in this movie is a bit too gratuitous at times. I say at times, in one scene in particular, it is very gratuitous. I get that it's like a genre thing. Exploitation films always have those, and now here's the scene where the lady goes for a swim with no clothes on. Oh no, and then here comes the driller killer to kill her. There's always like that in those exploitation films. I mean, this is clearly meant to be a homage to that kind of movie, or maybe an attempt to make a modern one of them. Because you even got like people from blaxploitation cinema in it, for example, like Fred Williamson, who's in it. He was in a lot of 70s blaxploitation movies. But it just feels kind of out of place in the movie that you've been watching up to now. I think that's part of the problem I had with the tonal shift, is it's like you're in Tarantino movie, exploitation movie for 10 minutes, and then you're in third part movie that I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to give away what it is. Yeah, it didn't sit well with me at all. It's probably just a matter of my personal taste, but it never appeals to me. It just always takes me out of the movie. I go to the movie for the story, not stuff like that. Fourthly, I think it's maybe a bit too schlocky. It just feels a bit cheap and like almost nasty. Like I said, that like at times you feel a bit like ugh when you're watching it, which isn't the kind of experience you want to have when you're watching a movie. At least I don't. So for my overall rating for this, I gave it a 6 out of 10. Bits of it were enjoyable, other bits didn't enjoy. I think this movie would be better if it didn't have the tonal shift and was all one tone or the other. I admire him for doing it. I admire Robert Rodriguez for having the guts to do it, because it is quite a shocking little bit, and it's quite a shocking scene where it happens. He does a good job of it, but it wasn't for me. And I quite like the two tones we kind of switch between. Like, I like Tarantino style movies, and I like what the movie turns into. But just the way it just doesn't sit right to me. Maybe if it was a bit earlier in the movie, I would have got into it more. I don't know. Do I think you should watch it? Maybe? I think you should maybe look into it yourself and see if you think you'd like it. For you will get the tonal shift is spoiled for you. It's so annoying, because I'm like, I think I would have actually enjoyed it more if I didn't know that was coming. If I went into this completely blind and thought this is just like a Quentin Tarantino movie, and then that tonal shift happened, I probably would have been like, whoa, what's going on here? This is great. But I think knowing it kind of diminishes the movie. So, yeah, I don't know if you should watch it. Maybe. Watch it if you want. Why not? Thirdly, this week, I watched the Limehouse Golem, also on Netflix. I had a bit of a Netflix binge because I couldn't be bothered looking at my DVDs, because I've been feeling quite under the weather this week. Still, not with the flu, just been feeling a bit bad. And I was like, I can't be bothered walking like 3 steps to get my DVDs. They're like 3 steps away. What do you think I am? An athlete? I watched this on Netflix, like I said. It was directed by Juan Carlos Medina. I hope I pronounced that well. And this came out in 2016. So for our plot summary, we follow Inspector Kildare, played by Bill Nighy, as he attempts to discover the identity of the Limehouse Golem, a grisly serial killer. Ooh, in Victorian London. I never mentioned it was in the Victorian era. We were in the Victorian era the whole time. So for our pros of this movie, so for the performances were pretty good. Bill Nighy is one of my favourite actors. I really like him. That's why I've been planning to watch this movie for so long and just never got around to it. But Bill Nighy is such a good actor, and he's good in this, and I really like him. I also thought Olivia Cooke as well was a really good highlight. Not that anyone else is bad in the movie. I quite liked everyone in it. But those two were the definite highlights for me. For my second pro, I quite liked a lot of the presentation in this movie. So, in a particular bit I quite like, so we obviously have multiple suspects for who this killer could be. We get these quite cool scenes where we get the killer leaves like a diary. We get, as Bill Nighy is reading, the diary entry, we get a recreation of the murder with the killer being played by whoever he suspects of being the killer at that moment in time. So, like, he'll read one murder and it'll be suspect A, and then when he reads it, a second murder, it'll be suspect B, and that's quite a fun little visual thing. I quite enjoyed that. Thirdly, it's nice to see Eddie Marsan in a movie. For those of you who don't know who he is, he's like an actor I quite like, but he's probably most well known for being in The World's End, where he's Peter. He's in like a lot of small things. You've probably seen him in something, if you watch a lot of movies, especially British movies, because he's in a lot of British movies, because he's pretty good. And I always like him, and it's nice to see him in this movie. He's good in this movie. I liked him in it. It was very good. Fourthly, I thought the story was interesting. I quite like crime stuff, either from the point of view of the police or the point of view of the criminals. I just always find something kind of engaging with them. And I quite like police procedural stuff. So I really enjoyed this. For my fifth pro, this is similar kind of thing, but it's quite an enjoyable film to watch. Like, it didn't feel like a slog or anything. It was just like a kind of fun time catching a sadistic serial killer. You know, gruesome, gory murders, and I'm like, yay, fun time. But no, I thought it's quite like a fun little adventure we go on. Not an adventure, but you know, a fun little story that we get to witness. Lastly, I liked how the story almost felt like a Penny Dreadful. For those of you who don't know, Penny Dreadfuls were these little magazines, I would say, that you could get in Victorian times that would be like a, you know, kind of gross, gory, blood and guts kind of story. Usually a true crime story, you know, in big inverted commas. The film almost has that kind of tone at times. I don't know how much of that is to like reference those kind of that like kind of morbid obsession with violence that people have. I think that kind of comes into it a bit, but I don't know how much of that is a commentary on that, like in Penny Dreadfuls and stuff like that, or how much of it is a commentary, or just not a commentary, but how much of it is because that's what Jack the Ripper was like. At times the movie is a bit, you feel at times, was this meant to be a Jack the Ripper movie? And for some reason you based it on, but it's based on a book. So was the book meant to be a Jack the Ripper book? I don't know. Going into the cons now, I feel like the film's maybe a little too long, just a little bit. In particular, there's a final scene, and I think the final scene I didn't need to see. I think you could have. There's a certain device about it. I don't want to spoil it. The minute you watch the movie and start it, you'll be able to guess what I mean. But there's a certain point where I would have cut the movie straight away, and instead we get about 4 minutes more after that. I know it doesn't sound like much, but I was just like, come on, man. It was a perfect ending you could have had there. Secondly, I think some of the suspects in this movie are very obviously not the person. Not as in the red herrings and they're like, oh, I'm gonna murder you later on, and then that person dies. It's more they are real people, and you're like, well, it's not gonna be the real person, is it? I think quite a few of the characters in this are actually real people. But there's one in particular who's probably more well known than the rest of them, and you go, well, it's not gonna be him, is it? Because he's a real person, and I think I would have remembered if he was a serial killer. I think that would come up more. Thirdly, when we get those sequences I was talking about, where we see the killers in the flashback, when we get them narrating the diary, it has this voice distortion effect played over it, I think to make them more sinister sounding. And I'm glad I watched this at home on my PS4 with headphones in, because I think if I'd been watching this in a cinema, I wouldn't have had a clue what was being said. Some of the like distortion is far too strong, far too powerful. Even with my headphones, I was struggling to hear that. If you watch this in a cinema, you would struggle to know what the person was saying. It's far too strong. It's not even that good an effect. It doesn't really add much either. I don't really get why it's there except to make them sound more monstery, which is a bit silly. So for my overall rating, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Do I think you should see it? Maybe, if you're into police procedural stuff, I think it's worth a watch. I'm not sure if it's for everyone, but I quite enjoyed it. So for the next film, I watched Three Amigos. I watched that on Netflix. It's directed by John Landis and came out in 1986. For a plot summary, three silent film stars are mistakenly hired to save a small Mexican village after they are believed to be three actual heroes. For the pros, I thought it had some funny scenes. It's a comedy with Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short, or the Three Amigos. I didn't mention that. But it had some funny scenes. It is quite funny at points. We'll get into that later. Secondly, I thought the score was pretty fun. It's quite silly and over the top. It fits the movie. You know, it's got that kind of crazy over the top vibe. I quite liked it. Thirdly, and this is like a really minor point, it's quite fun to have Joe Mantegna, John Lovitz, and Phil Hartman in a scene. Now, for those of you who don't recognise those names, Joe Mantegna is the guy who plays Fat Tony, and he's playing a movie studio boss with the exact same voice he plays Fat Tony with. John Lovitz has guest appeared in, like, I think the most Simpsons episodes of anyone. He is in a lot of episodes of The Simpsons, usually playing a different character every time. He's probably most memorable is Artie Ziff, the guy that dated Marge before Homer, and he's in a Streetcar Named Marge, which is one of my favourite episodes. As the theatre director, he was the critic when they did the crossover of The Critic. You know, he's in a lot of classic Simpsons. And Phil Hartman, you may remember him from such roles as Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz in The Simpsons, and Lyle Lanley from the Monorail episode. So it's kind of a Simpsons reunion before The Simpsons, which is kind of weird. It's really fun. Because, like, I had to look it up because when I was watching it, I was like, that's the guy who does Fat Tony's voice. He's talking like Fat Tony. He can't not be Fat Tony. And I looked up, I was like, oh my god. And then it got to another angle, and there's John Lovitz and Phil Hartman hanging out. And I'm like, hey! The gang's all here. On to the cons now. I thought some of the shops were very ropey. For example, the backdrops in one scene in particular are terrible. Even for a movie in the 80s, they're terrible. To be honest, for a movie in the 1990s, or 1919, when this movie is set, they would be terrible. It's really bad. I don't know if that's meant to be a joke about old films having terrible looking sets, or if it just is a terrible looking set. It's a scene at night where they're singing. If you've seen the movie, you might remember it. I don't know if that's meant to be a joke, because I didn't laugh at it, and I was just like, it looks terrible. Secondly, I think the tone is a bit all over the place. It can't seem to decide what kind of comedy it wants to be. It had like 3 writers, but that's not anything crazy for a comedy movie. In fact, one of the writers is Steve Martin, and one of them's Randy Newman, the guy who you most likely know from doing the soundtrack to Toy Story. Which, I don't know why, that just really freaks me out that Randy Newman wrote a movie and it's Three Amigos. It's just so weird. But yeah, it can't seem to decide if it wants to be a complete like screwball comedy, if it wants to be... It almost feels like at times it wants to be one of those like rapid fire laugh-a-minute movies, like something like Hot Shots Part 2, or... I say Hot Shots Part 2 because Hot Shots Part 2 is better than Hot Shots, in my opinion. Or something like Airplane, where it's, you know, joke, very silly, very funny. And then at other points, it's just, you know, your standard, oh, we're building up to this joke happening, here's the joke. That's the scene. This comes into my third point as well. I feel like the laughs are a bit too spread out for a comedy. There are portions of this movie where I don't laugh at all. And that's not a good sign in a comedy movie. There are bits where you're like, yeah, right, alright. Where's the joke? Like, it's a shame, really, because it feels like it could have been a better movie. And when I looked up the trivia section of this on IMDb, oh boy did I regret it, because I discovered movies that would have been a lot better. So, every version of the movie was going to have Steve Martin in it. One point, he was talking about it was going to be him, Dan Aykroyd, and John Belushi. And at another point, it was going to be directed by Steven Spielberg. Yes, really. I know it's a bizarre mental image. And the cast was going to be Steve Martin, Bill Murray, and Robin Williams. And all I can think is, I know you made E.T. instead, Steven. That's great. E.T.'s a great movie, don't get me wrong. But there could have been a comedy movie with Steve Martin, Bill Murray, and Robin Williams on screen at the same time, and that would have been an amazing movie. You should have made that movie, because I want that movie, and I'm never going to get that movie, and I'm quite sad about it. And also, I'll be honest, one of the three Amigos is a guy I'm not super keen on, and I think that kind of is why I felt that when I looked up those alternate versions, because Steve Martin, I quite like Steve Martin. Steve Martin's quite funny. Martin Short, I don't think I'd ever seen him in anything before this, and he was alright, he was quite funny. And then there's Chevy Chase. I don't particularly like Chevy Chase. He kinda comes across as an asshole. I know that's kind of his thing, but for whenever you hear stuff about him, I think he just kinda is an asshole. And that's not something I'm like, wow, what a likeable character. I'm like, oh, he's just an asshole. So for my overall rating for this movie, I gave it a 6 out of 10. To be honest, if it had been the Steven Spielberg version, I would have given this a 10 out of 10. That movie sounded amazing, if only it existed. Oh man. Do I think you should see it? Maybe? Like, some of the scenes are funny. To be honest, I think you'd be better suited looking up a funny moments from Three Amigos on YouTube. Because I don't think the movie as a whole is funny enough to sit down and watch. It's just kind of... Maybe if you've got nothing else to do, give it a watch. But I wouldn't go out of your way to watch it. Next, I watched Nightcrawler on Netflix, directed by Dan Gilroy in 2014. For our plot summary, we follow Jake Gyllenhaal as Louis, a disturbing man who works as a freelance crime scene, well, not photographer, but a filmer who sells the footage to news studios. So for our pros in this movie, Jake Gyllenhaal's performance is amazing. It kind of defies words. It's very believable, and he's creepy and unsettling. And when I looked him up and saw he wasn't nominated for the Best Actor Oscar, I was shocked, because he is outstanding in this movie. It just kind of surprised me, because it is so good. You can make a serious case for him winning the Oscar. He's that good. Second point, I really like the score. It's very evocative, very fits with the film, like tonally, and in terms of the mood of the film, and the kind of, I don't quite know how to word it. Just something about it, almost like an intangible about it. It just fits perfectly with what you see on screen, and adds to it, like a good score should. Thirdly, I think it's an interesting story about something different. I've never seen a story about the people that film crime scenes before, and it's really interesting. I didn't know that was even really a thing. Like, obviously I knew the news goes and films, like, you know, if there's a disaster, they'll film where it's been. I didn't realize it was quite so gruesome. I don't know if it's for the movie or if that's what it's actually like on the American news, because obviously I watch the British news in Britain. But if that's what American news is like, God, you guys are scary. So yeah, I enjoyed that. The story itself is interesting, as well as being about something I've never seen covered before. What actually happens in it is interesting. Is really good. For my next point, I thought it was really nicely filmed. It's quite interesting, really, because we see a lot of footage from his point of view with the camera he's filming, you know, the crime scenes with, or the accidents, or whatever he's filming for the news. And that stuff obviously looks terrible on purpose. But when you compare it to the rest of the movie, like, the rest of the movie's gorgeously filmed. It's lovely. It looks really good. It's really, really good. And it's funny to see that they also could do terrible filming at the same time, without it being obnoxious. Because I think a lot of things could do, oh, this is filmed on a home video thing and it's not very well filmed. You could do that and have it be bad. It feels like It feels more like an amateur who's bought a camera, looked up how to use the camera on the internet, and is then filming stuff. So it's not super professional, but it's not terrible either. It's good, I like it. For my next point, I quite like the message in the movie, or I suppose you could call it more like a commentary on people's need to see violence and how the news kind of plays into that, and the moral, not ambiguity, but the moral, well, sort of ambiguity, more kind of greyness to it. Because you're giving people what they want, but should people want what they want? That kind of thing. That was really interesting, and I thought really well done. For my next point, I think the film looks really good for its budget. I looked it up. This movie cost $8.5 million to make. It looks like it cost a lot more than $8.5 million to make. I would have thought 20, maybe. Because not only do we have a lot of aftermath, where we see wreckage and people that are injured and stuff like that. So that's obviously expensive. But we also have a lot of action scenes in this. I don't think action is quite the right word, maybe, but you have a lot of scenes in this where you go, yeah, it's not something you film on the cheap. That would have cost money to do. So to do it for such a small price is very impressive, I think. For my next point, I thought Rene Russo was really good in this as well. All of the cast is good. Jake Gyllenhaal's really, really good. I didn't want to diminish the rest of the cast in any way. They're all great. Rene Russo was quite good as well. She plays the director of the news channel that he's selling the footage to, and she's really good. Her character is quite an interesting one. I quite like how her story develops over the course of the movie. I thought the opening was very effective. I'm not going to say what it is, because that kind of would spoil it, I think. But it sets the tone for the whole movie. It kind of carries through it. And I really liked it. And for the first time ever, I don't have a single con for Nightcrawler. I loved this movie. And for those of you who are wondering, yes, for its overall rating, for the first time ever, we're only 17 days in, but we got one. We have our first ever 10 out of 10 perfect rating. Do I think you should see this movie? Yes. I think everyone should see this movie. It was honestly amazing. I loved every part of it. So go out and watch it now. It is great. Now on to our next film, which was Gravity, which I watched on Netflix, directed by Alfonso Cuarón from 2013. For our plot summary, we follow two astronauts, played by Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, as they attempt to survive while adrift in space following a disaster. Now on to the pros. Technically, this movie's very impressive. If you've not seen how they made it, it's quite impressive. They built these huge, elaborate camera rigs and lighting rigs that would basically Sandra Bullock standing up, and these lighting and camera rigs twirl round her to film her spinning in space, for example. They're very elaborate and very impressive, and the shots in the movie are impressive. Continuing on to that, on a technical level, the cinematography is also excellent. The way things are filmed looks quite cool, even for a lot of it's, against the CGI backdrop. Those rigs that I mentioned, they do add a lot to the shots. They make it more, it's better than just someone floating about on some wires being like, oh, I'm in space. Thirdly, I thought the CGI was great. You can tell a lot of effort went into it, and it really shows. Given all the backgrounds and that are CGI, obviously, they didn't send George Clooney and Sandra Bullock really into space. I suppose this is the second George Clooney movie this week. I never noticed that until now. For our next point, the sound design is really cool. So, in the sound design for the movie, whenever the vacuum is space, whenever they're exposed to it, whenever it's there is no sound. And I like that. Or if there is, it's kind of like a muffled noise you would hear from, something impacting with you. So say Sandra Bullock grabs something, you'll hear a muffled noise of her grabbing something, but very muffled. Stuff that goes on behind her, you don't hear it at all. And I like that. I think that works really well and is a really clever choice for the movie. I thought the score was good. It's very orchestral, and it kind of fits what's going on screen really well. I quite like that. Now on to my cons. Firstly, I'm just going to come out and say it. This movie's boring. Like, I appreciate all the technical stuff that went into it, but the plot's kind of boring, and like, that surprised me, because this is a movie, you know, 2 astronauts adrift in space with no hope whatsoever. That should be an intense thriller. Like, it says it's a thriller on IMDb, and I'm like, this isn't a thriller. I was not thrilled. It's just boring. The story is probably, if the story was written by someone else, or like, if the story was adapted into a script by someone else, it would maybe be quite thrilling. But it's just boring. I was like, how could you make people adrift in space with no hope, desperately trying to survive? It's just boring. And I mean, like, really boring. Like, this might be the closest I think this is actually the closest I've come to giving up on a not bad movie choice. I was bored senseless in this. Coming into that as well, I don't think the characters are interesting at all. George Clooney's character at least has like an element of a personality. Sandra Bullock's just kind of is sad because she's in a terrible situation, and that's kind of it. I don't know if it's meant to be so we can like surrogate ourselves onto her, but she's just kind of blank. She has one character moment that comes up in one scene. I'm not going to say what it is because it's about halfway through the movie, but that's it. That's her one character moment in the whole movie. And this movie's an hour and a half long. And thirdly, I think the dialogue is pretty weak at times. There's one scene where she contacts someone on a radio, and it's possibly that I would describe it almost as cringy. I don't like using cringy because I think it's incredibly overused as a word, but it actually kind of made me cringe. So in the description of her, it was very like ham-fisted. I didn't like it at all. So for my overall rating for this, I give it a 6 out of 10, and to be honest, I'm actually considering, is that maybe too high? Is it maybe 5? I'm going to stick with 6 because it probably is alright. Do I think you should watch it? No. I'm going to straight out say you should not watch this movie. It's boring. I appreciate all the technical stuff that went into it. Like, technically, it's a beautiful movie. On a technical level. On an actual engaging movie level, it's not interesting in the slightest. It's a bit like, you know those movies that are made to show off like IMAX screens? Where it's like a documentary about birds or something like that? You know, like here's the migration pattern. We're going to follow like the migration of swans. So like, you can view that in glorious IMAX footage, all this, you know, overhead shots of the world as we fly with the swans from like North America to South Africa or something like that. It felt like one of those kind of things, except I don't think swans migrate here, but that's not important. It felt like one of those, except it was an actual movie. So it wasn't that interesting. In fact, I'd rather watch this fake swan migration documentary I've made up. I don't think you should watch it. What makes this even more sad for me is this is the same director as Children of Men. Now, if you don't remember, I give that an 8 out of 10. I loved that movie. That movie was interesting. It was exciting. Gravity is the opposite. Gravity almost feels like we're watching a presentation of the technology you use to film Gravity rather than a movie. And that really disappointed me. I don't think you should watch it. The fact it was so well received kind of boggles my mind. Maybe it's better in the cinema. You know, seeing that stuff for the first time would maybe blow your mind a bit. And like seeing it in 3D, I wouldn't have watched it in 3D because I would have been sick if I watched this in 3D. But I don't think it was up to much at all. Now, finally, on to our last film. The most exciting film of the week. The film I have the most intense reaction to. So the final film I watched was MegaFault, which I watched on DVD. I didn't choose to buy this movie. I got it in a blind box of 400, I believe, ex-film rentals. You know, ex-film rental discs. So it's one of those. Oh boy, I'm glad I didn't choose to buy this disc individually. This film was directed by, this film, inverted commas, was directed by David Michael Latt, and it's from 2009. Before we get into the plot summary, just to give you a heads up of the type of movie we're talking about here, this movie was a sci-fi original movie, that's right, by the Sci-Fi Channel. They're known for their good work in the film department, and was produced by the Asylum, the same studio that made one of my favourite movies, Mega Shark vs. Giant Octopus, and all those mockbusters, that your confused aunt buys for you because she thinks you like the Transmorphers, and all those other wacky ones they did. So for our plot summary now, a miner, and I've got a question mark there, because I'm still not entirely sure if he is a miner, or what he's doing, but some man called Boomer, his name is Boomer, sets off a chain reaction by detonating some explosions that then cause a massive earthquake that threatens to consume the entirety of the United States of America. So, you know how I was talking about Nightcrawler was the first movie that I did that I didn't have a single con for? So, MegaFault is the first movie I've ever reviewed that doesn't have a pro. This movie made me angrier than any movie I've ever watched in my life. I despise this movie. We're going to get into it. I started taking notes during the movie and on my phone, and I will come back to those once I finish the ones I wrote down in my book, because I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I want you to know how bad this movie is. So cons. Straight away, the technical aspects of this movie. It is a mess. It feels like it was made by people who have never made a movie before and were forced to make one at gunpoint, but it is made by professional filmmakers. For example, in one scene, right at the beginning, there's a guy giving a speech. The actor flubs his line and they left it in the movie. You can film that again. You can stop filming, because you do stop filming, and go, oh, can we do that again, Derek? And this time, we can get you saying the line properly. But no, they leave it in the movie. They just leave in an actor messing up his line. Oh god. On to our next point. The terrible, and by god do I mean terrible acting in this movie, is all bad. A particular lowlight is the husband of lead woman, whose name I can't remember. Science Lady. We'll call her Science Lady. She's a seismologist. I can't remember her character's name, and I just watched this movie like 3 hours ago, and I cannot remember it at all. Oh god, now I'm giving away the game that this is filmed on the Saturday rather than the Sunday. No. But the husband is so bad. Like, unbelievably bad. Oh. The plot of this movie is exasperating. We're on to our next negative. The character. So for example, I don't mind spoiling the movie for the bad movie. I'm going to spoil this movie because no person should watch this movie. And I'm not saying that in like a ho ho ho, you shouldn't watch Manos, the Hands of Fate, ha ha ha, that's a bad movie, or you shouldn't watch The Room, that's a bad movie. I'm saying this in, you wouldn't watch a green screen for an hour and 30 minutes. I would have enjoyed that more. This movie is bad. Do not watch this movie. I can't stress that enough. So the plot. So, the husband and daughter split off from wife Science Lady. You notice I'm not introducing the characters properly, because who cares? The people who made this movie didn't care. So, husband and daughter split off from wife. They then, in the course of this earthquake movie, survive a plane crash where they're in one of those big military planes, like, that... Think like the thing they're in Predator, when they're getting dropped, that kind of thing. They survive that plane crash. They're not wearing their seatbelts. The pilots presumably die, but they get out fine. And when they get out of... When we cut to them from the plane crash, they're both not in the plane. The daughter is like a good mile, maybe, away from the... Well, maybe not a mile, maybe like half a mile away from the plane. She's a sizable distance away from the plane, and she's just walking about away from the dad. I'm like, how did that happen, movie? Oh, if I went through every tiny plot inconsistency in this movie, I could make a movie twice the length of the movie. It's only an hour and a half. Oh my gosh, right. So after that, they then eventually get back to their house. Their house gets flattened by the earthquake, right? So all that's left of this house is one column of bricks. Not even a wall, a column of bricks, which is part of the porch of the house. So the wife gets there at the end, and she's all sad because she thinks her family's dead. And then they walk out from somewhere, and they were alive the whole time. And you're like, how did you get there? Why did you not go outside the house when you were worried about the house collapsing? It's just, it's frustrating. Anyway, they survive the entirety of a house, by the way, collapsing on them by hiding underneath a table. I don't know how real that is. I always heard the thing with earthquakes is you're meant to go under a doorway, but they keep saying tables. And they're not like big, strong tables. Like at one point they're at like a dinner and it's like temporary tables and they're like, get under the table. I'm like, is that what you do in earthquakes? I thought it was like get in a doorway. Because like doorways are like reinforced anyway. I don't know. I don't live in a country where earthquakes are an issue, so someone might tell me in the comments. But yeah, there's a lot more to get angry about over whether you should hide under tables or not. The terrible effects, for example. Now, to call the CGI ropey in this movie would be a disservice to ropes. I can't even begin to explain the effects at times. For example, at one point we see a space satellite because getting into the plot. So, earthquake movie. So, naturally, their plan to stop the super earthquake is that the military built a satellite to cause earthquakes that would freeze the water table, and then when the water heats back up, it then cracks the ground and that causes an earthquake, okay? It makes no sense, but just go with it. That space laser, they plan to shoot it at a point the earthquake's going to reach. So they're going to cause an earthquake to stop the earthquake. Oh man. It's so dumb. Also, the military just have this, and it's in orbit around Earth, right? But not in like geostationary orbit above Russia, or like, it's never explained how they move it into position above the United States so quickly, because this earthquake's super fast. The speed of it's completely inconsistent as well. Oh my god, right. So the satellite is a PNG of a satellite. It's satellite.png, and they drag it across a stock footage of the Earth from space. That's not a joke. It's literally a PNG. It's not even a 3D model. Is it? Because it, like, you can tell by the way it moves. It is a flat object. It is a flat image. It's really bad. Because there's CG in the movie, and the CG is bad, obviously. There's one point where a building collapses, and it's like footage of a real city. I think it's when they're in Lexington. And the way the building collapses is it's down in the bottom right corner of the screen. And what happens is you get like the normal portion of the building. So it's like an office block. And then basically the only way I could describe it is if you selected an area on Photoshop and pulled that area down, but kept it connected. So it just kind of rubbery kind of look to the building as it's meant to collapse. And that's meant to be the building collapsing. I want to remind you, this is a professionally made movie. Manos was just a crazy guy, and he did better than this. No, he didn't, but, you know. I've got here, I forgot this, but there are so many plot holes in this movie that are larger than the ones that appear in the ground. There is one point where Boomer, he teams up with Seismologist Lady for most of the movie, and he's like, oh, she's like, where's the earthquake heading now? Oh, it must be, whatever that town was in West Virginia, I've forgotten it. It's Lafayette County. But I can't mind the name of the town. I just said it as well. But yeah, he's like, oh, I need to phone my mum. She lives there. Oh, don't bother. Like all the cell phone towers will be down. Okay, well, first of all, she might have a landline, lady. But in the next scene, the very next scene, so we go straight from that conversation to she's having a conversation with her seismologist sensei in the helicopter, where he's talking to her on a mobile phone. Now, it may be a satellite phone, but at no point do they establish it might be a satellite phone. So she's just like, don't bother trying to call your mum and save your life. I'm just going to chat to my friend now. It's such a light plot hole. I'm like, what are you doing, movie? So for my next negative, oh my god. Every location establishing shots. You know, we'll cut to a new location, you get an establishing shot. And you know, like in a lot of movies that are like thrillers or that, you'll get the little text on screen that says, oh, Washington DC and the time. This movie does that. And what it does is it freeze frames the picture for 10 seconds, and impact font, which is like one of the most basic fonts you can get, white, comes up centered, filling the whole screen with a black outline, and that then comes up on screen like it flicks between letters, like to get to the letter that's the correct one. Well, scrolls through them rather. And the same 10-second music loop plays for every single scene that's used in. And let me tell you, it was annoying the second time I heard it. And you hear it like at least 10 times in this movie. And that thing happens 10 times in this movie. And the worst thing is, it looks like it's edited in the same software I use to edit my videos. And I'm just one guy who does not even a successful YouTube channel. And I've got the same like editing stuff. Because when I add text to a video, it defaults to the center of the screen, it defaults to white, it defaults to a black border if I put a border on it. I'm fairly certain this was edited in the same software that my videos are edited in. So, say that gives you an idea of the level of quality we're talking about. This is my next negative. You're in for a long ride of negatives, by the way. This movie felt like it was much, much longer. I paused it. This is the first film I've ever watched, by the way, for this challenge. I had to stop watching and take a break from. Because I paused it and I thought, oh wow, I must be 40 minutes in. I was 20 minutes in. Never in my life have I been so tempted to turn the movie off. I persevered because I'm doing this challenge, you know? Otherwise, I would have given up. It was... oh my god, it was awful. I hated it. Oh man, I'm having like flashbacks. It's like one of those movies where the characters like relives their traumatic experience in Vietnam. That's me at the moment. Just flashbacks and MegaFault. Terrible acting. Is there a bit of terrible acting with the guy who's Boomer? By the way, the guy who causes the explosion that starts the megaquake is called Boomer, because of course he is. When his mum died. This is how bad the movie is, because I'm talking about a character's mum dying, and I'm laughing. So like, the gas mains are blowing up in the street, and they blow up some houses, but not all of them. So it's blowing up down the street, and they're trying to fly the helicopter there to save his mum before her house blows up from the gas. So of course it blows up before they get there. And we get this slow motion effect of him going, no. And the only way I could describe it is, if you picture like a action figure that's got like shoulders that can articulate, but just like the type that can go, up and down and back and forward and can bend at the elbows. If you bend the elbows so it's like you're flexing like you're flexing your biceps, like that, hands straight, like palms, extended, fingers out, and then kind of almost do the robot. That's kind of what the guy was doing, like a bad robot, and that's him meant to be so sad that he saw his mother's house with his mother in it explode in a fireball in front of him, and he's acting as That's why I think it's in slow motion, because it's the only use of it in the whole movie. I think it's in slow motion because they started laughing after they made it because of how bad it was, and they're like, we can't film it again. We only have interior helicopter set for like 3 days, so we have to quickly do it. So that's the cut that's in the movie. I've already mentioned the space satellite weapon. I've made a separate note of it because of how much it annoyed me. We've also got, to really ramp up the cliche, so they use the space weapon to stop the earthquake. So it'll be... I just realized this. I found another plot hole in this movie. This may shock you. Because they talk about how it's going to reach Nevada, or reach California in the Los Angeles fault, and then that'll cause that earthquake, or San Andreas fault. Because the one thing that anyone who knows about earthquakes knows about that San Andreas fault. But they then mention, the Grand Canyon's in the way. The Grand Canyon was in the way before you used the super laser. But they mention the Grand Canyon being in the way after they use the super laser, because that then turns into the climax of the movie, because they stop it going across the way towards California, but then it goes north, because it changes direction, because of course it does. So it changes direction, it's heading towards Wyoming, and the Yellowstone National Park, where it's causing the magma underneath it to seep out, and people melt in the street in one scene that's really bad. So like people melt, and then everyone, there's like a bunch of extras standing about, and they all just go on fire. They're just standing, and then they're on fire. I mean, as in, they have fire.gif pasted on top of them. But yeah, it's going to set off the Yellowstone volcano, which is, this thing that people know about. It feels very much like if you've seen a disaster movie, you can predict everything that's in this. I'm surprised global warming didn't show up somehow in this earthquake movie. It feels very predictable. But yeah, the Yellowstone volcano will then get set off by the earthquake. So what do? How do you stop an earthquake? By, of course, moving the Grand Canyon. They explode a huge portion of land in Wyoming that's 20 miles across to stop the earthquake reaching Yellowstone National Park. And somehow that just happens. And like, with no kind of authorization from like the military outside of strange military man who the lady knows for some reason, and it's never established why. I still don't know why she knows that general guy. So this is another plot point. There's a jet at one point. They've stolen a medical helicopter. I know I'm describing this movie and you're like, none of this makes sense. None of this flows together. Welcome to the movie. None of it makes sense. None of the scenes flow together. Stuff just happens. I've not even mentioned the RV family. They rescue in those like crazy, you know those helicopters that they have in America? The US military have where the propellers are on like wings kinda and they flip up and then they go forward. I don't know what they're called, but they're in one of those at one point where the interior is clearly the plane set with the netting taken down, and they rescue an RV family, and that scene's just in the movie for some reason. A lot of it feels like it was padded, and it's only an hour and a half long, and it's padded. You're like, oh. But anyway, so there's a scene where they've stolen a medical helicopter, because of course there is, and because the character Boomer can just fly a helicopter, that's never established before the scene they steal the helicopter in, where he distracts the helicopter pilot by blowing up a portable toilet. This movie sounds like it should be great. It's terrible. But yeah, so they steal the helicopter. See, I keep getting sidetracked because there's so much to talk about in this movie. So they steal the helicopter. They're flying. A jet tells them, oh, you need to land. All air traffic is grounded. Even though jets are in the air for some reason. Because, like, all the satellite communications not working with the earthquake or whatever, you know. So there's no air traffic control. We're like, okay, that's fair enough. The jets then, she just tells him, oh, keep going. You know, well, they're being pursued by military jets. So he does. Then the jets pull back and you're like, oh, okay. And then they fire a warning shot at the helicopter. Except they don't warn the helicopter until after the missile has flown past. Also, they fire a missile as a warning shot. And they do it after they fire the shot, they then warn them. They go, like, that was a warning shot. Also, the warning shot was aimed directly where the helicopter was, because the helicopter has to move to dodge the missile. So if they hadn't seen that, you would have killed 2 civilians in a medical helicopter. Maybe, just throwing this out here, guys and jets, maybe the medical helicopter doesn't want to land at the military base because someone's sick in it. They don't know who's in the helicopter. It's pretty bad. As another negative of this, you can really tell the writer of this movie went on Google, typed in earthquake facts, and that is seismologist. I'm surprised she's not called a seismologist with this type of movie this is. But the seismologist can just spout them. And like that's how we know she's a seismologist. Because she, like, at random points goes, there are 3,000 earthquakes a day, you know. Just out of nowhere. Because the person saw that fact and was like, I need to put that in the movie. That's an interesting fact. That'll show she knows about earthquakes. And then, because then she says that to Boomer, and then Boomer goes, 3,000 earthquakes a day? Man, we don't stand a chance. I'm like, the earthquake isn't conscious. It's not like a monster. It's not the earthquake monster coming to kill you. It's just a thing happening. So, mind you, there are multiple scenes in this movie where the earthquake chases people and the people outrun the earthquake. As in, like, the ground's collapsing and the people outrun the ground collapsing. And that happens multiple times. Oh, God. I've mentioned... Oh, yeah. Speaking of Boomer, he's probably, like, the most interesting character in this movie. And he just pointlessly kills himself as a self-sacrifice at the end of the movie. Because he rigs up this big explosion thing that they're doing. So, to create the new Grand Canyon. Just that sentence. The explosion thing they set up to make the new Grand Canyon. He rigs that up so it's like he has to drive past it with his car and an infrared signal will go out. Except the last 3 we see are in a straight line. Okay? So he tells the guy in the helicopter, take her, leave me. It's like, you're driving in a straight line, mate. Take off your shoe, get a brick, put something on the accelerator, leave the detonator, and get rescued too. And then when he dies, he does like the arms in the air, like he's in Platoon. You know that poster where the guy's like, ah, like that. That's what he does when he's sacrificing himself to the earthquake, because he gets consumed by the land, by the quake, by the MegaFault. I just got a point after this. One of my cons, I've just written awful, and that's it. That's all I've written. We're gonna go into the ones on my phone now, because I don't want to undersell how bad this movie is. We've got, oh yes, the camera at times. Basically every shot it's shaking. It's like constantly like the guy's drunk. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, that's because it's an earthquake movie. Oh, that's clever. It's not intentional. Because it shakes in the earthquake scenes and you think, oh, is it maybe shaking a little to, oh, the earthquake's there in the background and it's about to happen? No, it's just in every scene. It's just the person's not good at working a camera. We get one scene where that medical helicopter I mentioned, that helicopter lands, and then it takes off to escape the earthquake, obviously. And it takes off by reversing the footage of it landing. And this happens multiple times. Because when I mentioned the space laser used to cause the earthquake, just that sentence alone. But so we get like a CG shot of the laser firing and the beam coming down from the laser, from the satellite down to Earth. So when it gets turned off, the laser comes back up from Earth into the satellite. And then the satellite turns the opposite way to turn off. And you're like, if you turn the beam off, it ends from the emitter end. So it should be the beam from the satellite disappears till it hits the ground. That's how beams work. How can you not know how like stuff like that works? Mind you, I think it's a mix between the budget and lack of caring. Let's get back in this list now. Okay, we mentioned the cell phones, mentioned people like running the quake. Feels really amateur, the movie. I've kind of covered that already. Oh yeah, so the plane the husband and the daughter are in, that somehow hits another plane on the wing. Like it gets like its wing fully collides with a plane. And like when they crash the plane, the wing's still attached. The wing's fine. But it's smoking, obviously. But it's not in any way damaged. And I'm like, if a plane at high speed hits another plane wing at high speed, it would obliterate it. It's just this movie, man. I mentioned Boomer just being able to fly the helicopter. That still annoys me, thinking about that. We've got the... oh god, so the daughter's dialogue. I mentioned M. Night Shyamalan's dialogue right at the beginning of this video. I mentioned his dialogue is a bit like, I read a book about teenagers and now I know what they talk like, so I can do that in a movie. This movie feels like I don't know what children talk like, but they're not as smart as adults. So that's what I'll do. So the wee girl's dialogue in the movie is often like, Daddy, I want to go home. I want to go home, Daddy. So she's in a plane crash. A really traumatic experience, right? I don't know about you. If I was in a plane crash, I would be quite upset. I left my gummy worms, Daddy. And you're like, oh my god. She's so unlikable. It's a shame, because it's not the wee girl's fault. It's just the dialogue they give her. It's like, you've never spoken to an actual child, have you? You've never met one, have you? There's even one in the movie, and you've not talked to her. You've just told her, read that. Yeah, so they fire that laser. The space laser. We're back to the space laser. God, it still annoys me. So they fire that in an uninhabited area, right? So when we see it being fired at the ground, it goes like a bit like an earthquake thing. The shot we see the ground, there are buildings and houses clearly within about a mile of it. Like the area of impact of the laser includes the bit where you see the houses. And you're like, it's an uninhabited area. Like, what are you doing, movie? Oh god. Yeah, and at the finale, this is where it's almost like they gave up at the end of the movie, which is understandable. To be honest, I was half expecting it to be directed by Alan Smithy. That's the kind of impression I got. We see like scenes of cars driving through the quarry, which by the way, they use the same quarry at the beginning of the movie, which is set in Virginia, and the end of the movie, which is Wyoming. They are two separate, identical quarries in two different parts of the US. It's so blatant and it's really bad. But we see a bunch of military vehicles. I never mentioned this. The military vehicles are all super out of date. They're all like things from World War II in this movie set in when did this movie come out? 2009? So they are like, they're not right at all, and it's really disconcerting. I never even mentioned the screen. I forgot about the screen. So when they get to the military base, this info about this laser weapon and that is conveyed on a projected screen that's, I think it's meant to be, it puts out steam and then it's projected onto that. And no one questions it at any point, and no one's like, oh, that's weird. Why do you present it like that? Why does the military have this weird steam screen? It is so weird. This whole movie's weird. But anyway, so we see the shot of these military vehicles in the quarry. I know this is a mess, but it fits the movie, quite frankly. This rant, because this movie is a mess. So, see these cars, they're driving in the quarry. All the military vehicles are driving in the quarry. We cut to something else for half a minute, and then we see the exact same shot again. Not even joking, the exact same shot appears within 30 seconds of each other. And that happens at another point too. When is it? Oh, there's another point in particular, just close to that, where we see the same shot twice, and I can't remember what it is, but it's the exact same bit twice. And you're like, what happened? You could have cut those out. This movie's already 1 hour 30 minutes, and it feels like 3 hours. You could cut something out. Oh god, this movie is a mess. There's so many bits. I didn't even mention the bit where the dad and the daughter get a hitchhike with a truck driver and basically end up in a Mad Max scenario. Not with other cars, but like they're outrunning explosions and the earthquake, and the trailer of the truck is filled with petroleum, so the dad has to climb around the truck to get into it. And instead of, so he climbs outside the truck, okay? So he's hanging on to the side. So he's got his hands on like the, various pieces of metal and that. And he reaches up and grabs this tiny little ridge. It's about like the width of your finger that's sticking out, made of metal. So it's like there's no grip to that. Directly above it, and his elbows are bent, so he could stretch out and put his hand on this, is the open tiny little window that trucks have. Like at the bit where like the beds usually are in them for when the truckers are sleeping there. That window's open. So he could put his hand on the ridge of that. He never grabs it once because it wasn't in the script. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? You wouldn't fall off if you held on to the thing you could actually grip rather than the thing you're like clinging onto with your fingertips. Oh, so frustrating. This whole movie was terrible. So shockingly to no one, we had our first 10 of 10. We unsurprisingly have our first 0 of 10. Do I think you should see this movie? No. I don't think anyone should see this movie. If I could, I would destroy every copy of this movie that exists so no one would see it. I hated this movie with a passion. The worst thing is, I looked it up on IMDb, because I said I look up all of my films. It has a 3.2, I believe. It does have a 3.2 on IMDb. This film wishes it was a 3.2. The only thing keeping it above negative, I actually felt like giving this a negative number. That's how much I hated this movie. It was terrible. Don't see it. Not even in like a, this isn't me going, don't see it because it's so rubbish. This is a, don't see it because you'll have wasted an hour and a half of your life and you'll never get it back. This is the closest I came to quitting the challenge so far. Manos, I never felt like quitting. Amazing Bulk, I hated that movie. I didn't feel like quitting. This movie, I felt like never watching a movie again. That's how much I hated it. So 0 out of 10, never see it. Now on to more positive things. What am I watching today when this movie goes out? Well, I'm watching Hellboy on DVD, directed by Guillermo del Toro. What is my movie of the week? Well, unsurprisingly, it is, of course, Nightcrawler. I gave it a 10 out of 10. It has to be the best movie. I loved it. I think you should all see it, because I actually hadn't heard of it until I saw it on Netflix and thought that sounded interesting. And then I watched it and was like, why haven't I heard of this movie? It's great. So I think you should all watch that. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was really difficult to record. I'm still angry about MegaFault. Like, it made me, like, the angriest I've ever felt about a movie. I've never felt this angry about a movie before. Because usually I'm like, oh, whatever, you know, a bad movie's a bad movie. I feel like phoning up the people who made this and demanding them to somehow refund the time I spent watching this. It was atrocious. Oh, man. Anyway, enough MegaFault. Just think about Nightcrawler and how good it was. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed me losing my mind at MegaFault. I hope you guys have some comments. I always like reading comments. I like seeing what people suggest. I hope Anders is freaked out by suggesting a movie I then watch the next week twice. He's done that now and it's kind of creepy. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to subscribe to see all my other videos, you can do that. That'd be cool. And I'll see. Oh, you can leave a like as well if you enjoyed the video. That's what people people professionals say. Oh no, MegaFault has broken my mind. There must be a MegaFault in my brain. No. Anyway, you can like my videos if you want to show how much you enjoy them. That's always nice. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Shut up, bloody ding dong ding dong.